first question, we're going to start with you, Mr. Fioretti, and pick up on some of the threads we heard in the opening statements. At every step of the criminal legal process, one sees evidence that people of color are overrepresented. People of color are more likely to be stopped on foot or in a car. People of color are more likely to be arrested. And people of color are more likely to be charged, prosecuted, and sentenced to prison. With that in mind, do you think that the criminal legal system is racist?
What was with that in mind, what?
Do you think that the criminal legal system is racist?
Well, I think if you apply the law fairly and you look at what needs to be done, we have a system of justice that unfortunately feeds into the poverty, feeds into segregation here. We have a long history of housing segregation in this city that has been caused by redlining real estate agents. So I'm not going to say it's racist, but there is an inert bias in the system. I worry about somebody. This last summer, I had a large financial crimes case against an native from India, an Indian, and I kept saying every time we would walk into court, we've got to be careful. Do you want this to be a jury of your peers who are going to judge you in this case? There is a bias in our jury system, and we have to be sure that when you're an attorney, especially on the defense side and on the state's attorney's side, that we make sure that we have unbiased jurors who choose and decide the fate of people.
Thank you. Same question to you, State's Attorney Fox. Is the criminal legal system racist?
Yes. Yes. I mean, I think it's a difficult conversation that we have, particularly for those of us who occupy these roles, but I don't think that you can address the issue if you are not honest about where the problems lie. The fact of the matter is, if you look just in Cook County, 86% of the people who are in our jail are black and brown, 86%. And the black and brown population of Cook County hovers around somewhere around 50%. 92% of the young people at our juvenile temporary detention center are black and brown. Now, having been an assistant state's attorney for a number of years in the office, I was oftentimes frustrated and conflicted about what we were doing. I know for a fact in juvenile court, we were prosecuting young people for marijuana possession, for example, largely African American and Latino kids on the south and west sides in ways that was dramatically different than what was happening in other neighborhoods. Neighborhoods that had the opportunity to policed differently. I know when we look at, for example, our drug or cannabis, which is now legalized, the fact of the matter is in Cook County, we were prosecuting and arresting African Americans and Latinos at a rate of 4 times that of whites. When I look at the first day of cannabis legalization in Illinois, you all saw the news, you saw the lines, the people who were waiting 6-7 hours for that first dispensary to open. It was the United Nations. There were people who, it was clear and evident, who used marijuana, and yet that population was not reflective of what we see in our criminal justice system at 26th Street.
Thank you. And Mr. Conway, the same question to you.
Yeah, I would agree. Unquestionably, yes. I mean, we look at, for example, in 2017, if someone was being sentenced on a felony, if the defendant in that case was white, there was a 40% chance they'd go to prison. If the defendant was Hispanic, there was a 44% chance they would go to prison. And if the defendant was black, there was a 58% chance they'd go to prison. And of course, I don't put that at Ms. Fox's feet, of course, but nonetheless, it shows an implicit racism in the process. And when I think back when I was a kid, for example, I used to scalp tickets outside Wrigley Field all the time. And I was of course never arrested, but yet years later when I was a misdemeanor prosecutor on the north side, I would see ticket scalping cases coming all the time, and they were not people obviously that looked like me, which just shows that. And if we're really going to combat that, at minimum in the state's attorney's office, we need to be consistently focused on diversifying the office so it looks like our communities, and also training prosecutors so they're aware of the implicit biases that exist in the system and certainly in sentencing and charging.
Thank you. Our next question, we'll start with you, State's Attorney Fox, and again, pick up on the same thread. How can the state's attorney office in Cook County under your leadership work to eliminate racial disparity in charging decisions, bail recommendations, plea bargains, and sentencing recommendations. And I'll ask, to the extent you can speak to them, what specific steps would you take in this area?
Thank you. One of the first things that we did was we made every piece of felony case level data available for us to see and available to the public. You can't fix what you can't measure. It's one thing to say anecdotally, you can go and look at the jail population and say that's mostly black and brown. We wanted to be able to see on every charge that we got, what were we doing? How were we making our charging decisions? So I think the first thing that we did was say, let's look at all of it. And it was unprecedented. We were the first prosecutor's office in the country to put our felony case level data on an open data portal, and we've developed that into a database. We then were able, once we had that information, to start asking the questions. What was it in our charging decisions that allowed for us to charge certain people in different ways, or what wasn't there? Next, we started to, also baked in there, we have been doing implicit bias training for years, but implicit bias training without real sustainable measures is just a training that people have to go to. So once we got our information about how we were charging, what was happening with sentencing, we then brought everyone in together and had conversations around overcharging, for example. When you would see that we would charge certain people 3 times as many charges as necessary in an effort to get them to plead to something lesser, and started having real dialogue and training on charging decisions practices with everything rooted in how do we address the racial disparities.
Thank you, State's Attorney Fox. Mr. Conway, same question.
Yeah, I spoke a little bit about some things that we need to be doing as far as diversifying the office, as well as what we're doing regarding training prosecutors. And I would pick up along the data theme that Ms. Fox spoke of, in the sense that we need to be aware and constantly monitoring that, so we can course correct the racial disparities that we're seeing in our charging and sentencing decisions.
And just to follow up briefly, would you agree with State's Attorney Fox's characterization that this is the role of the State's Attorney Office to eliminate these racial disparities, identify them, and eliminate them?
Unquestionably, yes.
Thank you. And Mr. Fioretti, the same question to you.
Well, I think the issue is not on it is on how we charge, to make sure that we are charging appropriately. But the question gets to be is, what are the judge's decisions that lead to the sentencing? And who are the attorneys? A lot of the crimes that are committed and the murders that are committed and the shootings that are committed are happening in black and brown communities. And they're being caused by black and brown suspects. And when we deal with that kind of an issue, we have to have an understanding on what's happening in our neighborhoods. When I pushed for 2.5 years in the city council on police reform and what we needed to do, it was the ultimate end on what would happen, on how the officer was charged, what was the outcome, what the board made a decision, so everybody knew. Up until that point, everything was in secret on what was happening on the police board. We need to refocus. What does it take that somebody picks up a gun and fires into a crowd? That's the issue that we have to look at. We've had 3 mass shootings this year and 33 last year. And where is it in the news? We need to go to the root causes of crime, which is poverty, which is racism, which is the ineffective assistance of counsel.
Thank you.